Okay, and we will go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, and welcome to the first live virtual 10-minute walk learning series question and answer session. My name is Jared Mummert, and I'm a program specialist at NRPA working on the 10-minute walk campaign. Today we're going to be diving deep into partnerships and coalition building. And joining me are three great panelists representing different perspectives of partnerships for Parks and Recs agencies. So before we get to your questions, I'm sure you have some burning ones. I know some folks are less familiar with the campaign, so I just want to take a moment to give you a brief overview of the campaign, the 10-minute walk campaign, as well as our learning series. So I'm going to share a screen with you. And here it is. Great. So the 10-minute walk campaign was launched in October 2017 by the Trust for Public Land, NRPA, and the Urban Land Institute. These three organizations represent different interests in parks and rec space and really came together around this idea that everyone deserves a great park close to home. And so we currently have nearly 200 mayors signed on to the campaign. And so we're really excited about this, and we're getting some more every month. And so then as a part of this campaign, we're providing tools for park professionals, whether they're from grant-funded cities or not. And we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to achieve the 10-minute walk campaign goals. And so this learning series is going to be made up of videos with best practices and case studies from your peers in the field. Some of the upcoming videos that we're going to cover will be on equity, community engagement, and sustained funding, as well as others. And we're going to be doing this over the next 3 years, so until 2020. These videos are going to be followed by a question and answer session, which you are joining today. And this is your opportunity to ask questions to your peers directly. And we will get started with that in just a few moments. So now let me get off of this. Stop here. Great. And so now I'd like to just take a moment and have our panelists introduce themselves. So first is going to be Rob Mandel. He's the Chief Operating Officer of the Crystal City Business Improvement District.
Yeah, thanks. Again, my name is Rob Mandel. I work with the Crystal City Business Improvement District. That's in Arlington, Virginia. It's directly across the river from the District of Columbia, so we have a very strong sphere of influence with the capital. And our organization is really charged with creating a climate for economic development here in Crystal City. We do a lot of placemaking programming, a lot of marketing support, and outreach to our community. We're essentially a downtown community that is comparable in size to downtown Indianapolis. So we're actually quite a major player in the economy regionally and in the state of Virginia. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you all, and thanks for having me.
Great. Great. Thanks, Rob. And up next, we have Bill Salvatore, who's the Unity Cup Director with the Philadelphia Parks and Rec.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Definitely appreciate it. So my major project is what's called the Unity Cup. It's an immigrant-based soccer tournament in the city of Philadelphia. So figure it as a World Cup for Philadelphia. And, you know, from a partnership perspective, it's a lot of municipal partners as well as a lot of nonprofit partners and sponsorship partners. So we kind of see all parts of the spectrum there when it comes to partnerships. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Great, thanks. And then representing the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, we have Aaron Tobin, the Community Outreach Coordinator.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Erin Tobin. I'm with the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, which is the nonprofit partner in Pittsburgh in restoring the parks to the excellence that they should be. And my role at the Parks Conservancy is really to connect the community with the different resources in the city, and also work with them closely on any park projects that my organization is spearheading. So I get the pleasure of being able to work with the city, other nonprofit partners, closely with corporate or business partners, and most importantly the community, and being able to connect all the dots. So it's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing questions and talking more with everybody. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, Erin, and thanks everyone. So before we dive in here, I would just like to take a moment to make sure everyone knows how to ask questions and how to use Zoom. And so all attendees are muted and are in listen only mode. So you don't have to worry about your cameras and you don't have to worry about speaking. Now, if you would like to ask a question, there is a question and answer option. And so if you look at your Zoom window at the bottom, there is a black bar that pops up with some options for chat and so on. One of the options is Q&A. If you just click that, you should be able to submit your questions that way. If you're having any technical issues, please just let us know in the chat box, which should be on the side of your screen, or also that option at the bottom of your screen. And just let us know, and we'll try to help you out. And also, just so everyone knows, we are streaming this live on Facebook. So if you're joining us via Facebook, welcome. And lastly, just to let you know, we will be recording this, and this will be available on NRPA's website in the next couple weeks. So then let's go ahead and get started. You all can start sending in your questions. And just to get us started, I'd like to really start at the beginning of what partnerships look like. And so let's say you have a project idea, right? And you're in the need of partners. How do you choose those partners? And maybe Rob, we can start with you.
Sure. Sorry, I was muting myself, so I didn't hear any erroneous noises. So like I said in my intro, our mission is really creating a climate for economic development. So a lot of our focus on what we do in the area is really focused on that. A lot of it's about talent attraction. A lot of it is about quality of life. And so our open spaces are particularly important for those things. What's interesting about Crystal City is that other than the new kind of developed park that was opened in 2013 on a brownfield site, there's very little public open space that's owned by the jurisdiction, the Arlington County, within our area. And so we actually work with a lot of private spaces, but I would suspect similar approaches to partnership and coalition building in terms of projects or programs that we were working on. So for example, on an event basis, what we're really looking for our organization is groups that kind of fill a mission need for us. So for example, we partner with a farmer's market. And so years ago, we had reached out to them, found the very best farmer's market that we could find that would be a turnkey operation that adds a lot of value for us. They have their own infrastructure, and then we get an amazing partnership delivering something that we really needed in the community. We're also looking for partners that have kind of strong core missions for themselves that align with what we do. So from an economic development standpoint, somebody who's focused on green and access to food is really, and sustainability is really important to businesses at the moment, and they want to locate in places that have these characteristics within them. So maybe that's a good place to start the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Erin or Bill?
Good, Erin.
just adding to what Rob was saying, the Parks Conservancy, we are a nonprofit, so we don't own any of the land that we're working in, but we do have an overarching operating agreement that allows us to work in any of the 160 parks in Pittsburgh. So first and foremost, our first partner is always the city, and then the community. But some other unique partnerships that we have developed through the last 21 years that the Parks Conservancy has been around is working closely with other entities of the city. So the way it works in Pittsburgh is that we have a water and sewer authority, which is an authority of the city. It doesn't exist under the city of Pittsburgh government. And then we also work with the sanitary authority. And they, one of the key things about our projects is figuring out what benefits they need and why they would want to be coming to the table to be working on a park project with us. So with the stormwater management concerns that we have in Pittsburgh, those two authorities of Pittsburgh have been very key partners in the work that we do, not only in helping to mitigate stormwater in the parks in Pittsburgh, but also to help identify other funding sources. So being a nonprofit, we can apply for different funding sources and obtain different things than, a local municipality could. So it's really about finding that balance between, how do we bring these other partners to the table? What benefits are they going to get out of partnering with us on a park project to make, a beautiful park space for people to enjoy? And also identifying different ways we can bring in different kinds of funding. And that's been something really critical for the success of the Parks Conservancy and all the projects that we've done over the last 20 years.
Great. Yeah. And Bill?
Yeah, good stuff there, Rob and Aaron. So I guess the city of Philadelphia, a little bit of a different perspective. A lot of times partners will find us first. We serve somewhere around 6,000 kids a year in our after school and summer camp programs. So a lot of times partners will come to us, looking for access to the kids, either through us or the school district. So that's kind of interesting in that you have to look at it with kind of like, a lens, like, are they just here for the kids or are they here really to partner? So to Aaron's point, you got to measure the value really in the partnerships. But when it came to a big project like the Unity Cup, it was really about reaching out to the stakeholders in the soccer communities around the city. So not just, who's playing soccer, adult groups and things like that, but we also had to engage immigrant communities and those, immigrant nonprofits almost, or community organizations that are out there and they're doing work in the community, whether it be Indonesians in South Philly or Liberians in Southwest or whatever, and kind of get their partnership and their buy-in on something like this. Because, on a project like that, I don't know how familiar you are with immigrant communities, but they are a little hesitant to work with the government on projects. So we have that whole hurdle to jump through as well. So it's a really good connecting point and a really good partnership at this point, but there was definitely some challenges early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely going to get into talking about challenges to partnerships and that sort of thing. But sort of building off of that, Bill and Aaron and Rob, you all sort of mentioned this idea of non-traditional partners. Maybe it's people that you don't typically look to partner with. For example, the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, I know, had the Pittsburgh Park Prescription Project, and they partnered with community health organizations and the Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh, which they may not usually partner with. And so maybe, Aaron, you can touch on this, but I'd like everyone to sort of touch on the idea of how do you start these conversations with, going to the farmers market and asking to partner with them, or going to these immigrant community groups, and how do you just start this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. The Pittsburgh Parks Prescription program is a really good example of a non-traditional partnership that we've been doing. So as you mentioned, Jared, the Parks Conservancy reached out to the Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh and a variety of different health partners so that we could work together on basically the idea is writing a prescription to go to the park and use the park and get out there and maintain your health for that reason. So that's a good example of I think what I'd like to touch on and be really clear about is a lot of these partnerships, you have to work really hard to build trust first before people are going to be, willing to partner with you sometimes, especially some of the stakeholder groups and user groups of the parks. For example, in one of our projects currently, we've been working really hard to build, relationships with the community because they're seeing us invest in their park, and they'd really like to also be a part of that investment themselves. So one of the new things that the Parks Conservancy has been looking at as we move forward and continue to do more park improvement projects, which is something very new for us, is looking at how we can build the community into the projects themselves, whether it's by hiring local contractors and whatnot, or, teaching people how to do landscaping projects to help maintain our projects. That's been a really unique learning curve for us. That we're really trying to work through currently with our most recent project in McKinley Park. That I think is something that is needed across the country, not just in Pittsburgh. So I wanted to touch on that too. But I think a lot of these partnerships and getting the work done is really about spending the time to build that trust with people, so that they do want to come to the table and do partner with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what you said there, Erin. You definitely need a connecting point, and for us, we were really lucky because we could connect with communities over soccer. It was their passion, so we got lucky in that aspect. But when you're bringing other non-traditional partners to the table, for instance, like we partner with Mural Arts and Small but Mighty Arts, like some nonprofits and some other art-based organizations. Like, how do you bring them into a soccer tournament,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you got to kind of figure out what's the best connecting point, and for us, connecting them to communities was good because like, hey, we've never done a mural in the Guatemalan community before. So I think it's really important, to build that trust through, some sort of mutual connection.
Yeah, and I'll add on there that again, because our open spaces are typically privately owned, the property owners tend to be like the risk-averse municipality in many cases. So you can kind of look at them like that. And having an organization like a business improvement district actually acts as kind of like a clearinghouse for these kinds of requests. It really resonated with me what Bill said about people who want to partner find you. And a lot of times people you don't necessarily want to partner with find you. And what they feel particularly passionate about what they're doing, but it doesn't necessarily have mission alignment with what we do. And so we do have to kind of act a little bit selectively in those cases if it doesn't kind of meet our mission, devoting staff resources to those kinds of projects, or even making the ask to our property owners. It's kind of on us to screen out the things that aren't particularly appropriate, or things that, from a staff time perspective, don't match up. So I think BIDS and similar organizations can really act that way, whether it's with a private owner or even the public. We have a similar scenario when it comes down to things like road closures for races. We work very closely with the county government in those cases, and the county gets asked quite frequently, as you can expect in the sphere of the National Capital Region, whether it's races or protests or other kinds of gatherings that want to take up street space. And there, again, we kind of act as a clearinghouse for our county partner in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so sort of building off of that then, you've started having these conversations, and I'd like to just kind of touch on the idea that all of you sort of mentioned was this idea of building trust. And so just thinking about when you form this partnership, how do you build the trust with these partners, whether it's intergovernmental or with private sector groups or with these immigrant organizations or the communities?
Lawyers, yeah, lawyers and contracts tend to help. But I think starting with a personal relationship and mission alignment really, I think is a key part of that. But you do gotta, insurance and making sure you're kind of communicating a sense of responsibility for what you're doing. I think both sides kind of need that sense of a structure and organization, and it's a little bit bureaucratic and boring, but a lot of those things really help in terms of establishing that level of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say, to bring a little city into it, I would say you absolutely have to keep it real with people. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Go in 100% honest from the beginning and say, listen, I don't know if we're going to be able to do that or not. And it goes a long way when people know that you're feeding them the truth and not just what they want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that, Bill, because I think that a lot of times people want to provide good news and say, yeah, we'll get that done. But oftentimes, sometimes there's restrictions, budget restrictions, resources, and whatnot. So I think that's really key. Yeah, being good with your word, and being patient. I think with Bill's example of the immigrant and refugee community, there's a lot of trauma there. And so being patient and willing to continue to get to their level and meet them where they are, whether that's at their community meeting, at their community festival, go to where they are and make them comfortable. I have found it to be really, really helpful. So much of what I do is attend community meetings to provide updates on park projects or to receive feedback. And I have found it to be really, really useful to not just go for my update and then leave, to stay throughout the entire community meeting, to really understand the context of what's going on in that community outside of just the park project that I'm there to talk about, because then you understand the other things that are going on, whether there's, a new restaurant opening up or a new development happening, or, something that's going on at the school district. It really helps you understand the dynamic of the community, and then, you can then provide, potentially different resources within the park, the open public space that's open for everybody, by learning that. So I would say patience and really, really listening to people, so you can, build that trust up over time.
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, I would say,
Please.
definitely know your audience. When you go into a meeting or an engagement event and you're talking to city officials versus an immigrant community, you have to understand that there's going to be a language barrier. They're not going to want to hear about budgetary constraints or hear about the lawyer jargon. You can get away with that, with another city department or another municipal agency. But if you're talking community groups, you don't know what their reading level is, what their understanding level is. So, you really bring it to where you need to bring it to.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm wondering if you all could give this a sort of example around how you've built trust within existing partnerships. Our 10-minute walk cities, a lot of them are trying to build these partnerships with immigrant communities and really just local communities that, maybe don't have the best relationship with local government, or they don't know how to be engaged, and maybe local government doesn't know how to engage with communities. And so I'm wondering if you have any examples that you could share.
Yeah, I'll go first if you guys don't mind. I went into the belly of the beast my first year doing the COP. I went down to deep Southwest Philly, which isn't the most hospitable of places. And I went into the Sierra Leone community for a festival. And I was probably the first, kind of city official they saw down there in all the years they've been doing the festival. And walking around, I was the only one in a collared shirt and, really the only Caucasian there. And, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. They're feeding me all kinds of food from West Africa. And, but for me to be there for 3 hours to see what they were up to and to watch their performances and everything, that was a huge deal. And then they went back to other communities and said, hey, this guy's all right. He went out and he promised he'd come visit us, and he visited us.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting into the community and showing some visibility is huge. Absolutely. That's great. Erin, do you have any examples?
Yeah. So we just completed an update to one of the master plans we have for one of our historic parks in Pittsburgh, the oldest park in Pittsburgh, actually. And it's probably one of the most diversely used parks in the city. We've got the Children's Museum, the National Aviary. We've got 3 schools touching this park. It's a 10-minute walk from the Pirates and Steelers stadiums, a hospital, and it touches 4 different neighborhoods, very different neighborhoods. So it's one of these parks that there's just so many different stakeholders and different user groups. So the hard part about it sometimes is balancing everybody's, needs and desires for the park. So we went through this process, and we did, hundreds of meetings and large community meetings and small individual stakeholder groups and whatnot. And so we found throughout that process that we were hearing all these different things, but the number one thing that we were hearing is that we needed to give more time to gather feedback. And in my opinion, there's never enough time to do community outreach or engagement. There's always more to hear, always more to listen to, and always more to learn. But oftentimes you're restricted by budget. So what my organization did is we extended our time on this project, which I think was critical in the success of the overall project and update to this master plan work. And to add what Bill said, meeting people where they are and going to their events. Not asking them to come to yours, and go to theirs and build, show them that you really do care about them and you're interested in learning more about what's going on in their world, their neighborhood, their culture. It really, really does go a long way, and it's fun. And then you build this rapport with people, and they're going to want to keep coming back and participating in your process.
Well, I'll start by going boring with the legalese, and I think one of our most popular kind of unique events is this thing we call Crosshairs Garage Races, and it's literally what it sounds like. It's bike racing inside of a parking garage, an underground parking garage, and as you can imagine, it raises a lot of knee-jerk concerns about safety and liability. So one of our talking points is well-insured event with waivers and all of that fun stuff, but kind of more holistically. I think sometimes trust building can take a fair amount of time. So I've been with this organization for about 11 years. And when we first started, you kind of start out small and you do a couple of partnerships, a couple of programs, just to show what you can do. And I think as you build a track record of success, and collaboration is a key part of that, and two-way communication, it all kind of feeds into a sense of trust as you go along, and that's what sets the table for being able to do things like the Crosshairs Garage Races. When if the organization that we partner with went straight to an owner anywhere in the country, really, it'd be hard pressed to suddenly kind of accept that as a take on that liability. Having our organization kind of again, be this clearinghouse and this create this sense of trust with this event really makes it so that it can happen. And I think there's a lot of examples of that in our programming, whether it's outside or inside.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add, Rob, when you said communication, I think that is such a critical thing that people forget to do sometimes. Even if it's 2 weeks after a meeting, you still don't have the answer to the question, reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, I didn't forget about you. I'm still working on that project. I'm still working on that question. That goes a really long way. It goes a long way for me. It goes a long way. People are like, okay, that person didn't forget. They really do want to help me figure this out and connect me to the right person or whatnot. I think just a small phone call or email goes a really long way to helping build that trust over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so,
Jared, if I could just add one thing.
Please.
Sorry. It just made me, the communication thing made me think of just some recent things that have been going on here. Just related to community reaction, related to density, which is a little different, but it's very front and center when it comes to things in our sphere of influence, like the Amazon HQ2 conversation, which is really gets a lot of press locally. But trust can break down when people take strong positions without recognizing each other's interests. And a lot of times there's a lot of alignment in the context of, everybody wants a nice park, but the positions that people take to kind of get there can be at odds. So I think it really, when Aaron emphasized the communication again, it just made me think of that, being open about that, even though you might be at odds, like trying to really dig down at those interests is critical for trust building and partnership building as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of going off that then, thinking about challenges that come up, whether they're challenges within your partner coalition or challenges that you have to face with your coalition. I'm wondering how, if you all have examples of ways that you approach that situation, and maybe you mitigate the situation, and and if you just have some examples around that. Confronting challenges.
Yeah, I could probably, there's lots of little ones that pretty much in any kind of program you do, but again, I think communication is the number one thing, and acknowledging that you're not going to necessarily be in agreement on everything. I think that goes a long way, and just being open to a conversation and how you would mitigate. A lot of times when we're doing events, we close the roads, like I mentioned, and over the years, we've evolved in terms of the kinds of communications we've done to make sure people are aware. And a lot of that has come from feedback, right? And it kind of recognizing the hardship that those kinds of things might impose on people who live or work here. And just providing mitigation strategies, alternative parking, even though it might not be as convenient as what they're looking for. Just showing that you're willing to go the extra mile and listen to concerns, and try and come up with some solutions that address them. It might not be exactly what they want, but I think a lot of times people just want to be heard. And so to recognize that you're moving forward with that is important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, going off that just a little bit. When you have a lot of different partners at the table, everybody's going to feel like their stuff is the most important, right? It's just natural. So you got to maintain that balance of everybody having a seat at the table with what you're trying to accomplish as a whole. And, a lot of times it's our job as leaders to really make sure that everybody feels like they're well represented, but also, keep it balanced so the project moves forward.
Yeah, I think making sure that everybody feels well represented is key. And I think from our perspective, as a nonprofit, we have the flexibility sometimes to go back to the drawing table when we have faced a challenge or a point in a project where, we were chugging along, things were going well, and then, we got very, firm feedback from, a partner or a community group about, something that they're seeing that we maybe just totally missed. For example, I was speaking about the McKinley project a little bit earlier, and one of the things that we learned very quickly from the community was, they were very, very excited about us coming in to do this work, but they were also really interested in physically being a part of the work themselves. And so, our mission is not creating jobs, but our mission is to improve the park spaces for all. But we heard loud and clear from the community, hey, we want to be building these projects. We have the skill set. We want to be included in this. So we went back to the drawing table and we changed the project so that we could carve out a portion of the project resources to fund some hyper-local contractors for this project, which was challenging for us because it was the first time a community had really, come to us and say, hey, look, we can work with you on this. We want to be a part of this investment. And so it's been really, wonderful that we've had, the folks at my organization that have been willing to work with the community, but sometimes it is really difficult because, we have our mission, and it's hard when the other partners come to the table and say, well, what about my mission and what about my needs? So really just being open to listening and learning and, looking ahead to the next time you do a project in that community with those partners, and how might you be able to do it differently, and always being willing to listen and think creatively for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like a lot of making sure you have open communication, make sure that you're flexible and you're open to ideas. And when challenges really do arise, it's about getting back to the project's roots and finding that common ground. So great. I'd like to just take a step in the direction of public-private partnerships. It's something that all of you have touched on. And so something that someone asked was, how can local government establish relationship? And Rob, this is maybe for you, but how can local government establish relationships with developers?
Well, I know in the context of my community here is if a developer wants to get something built, the relationship is created. There has to be a conversation between between the developer and the municipality. I think Arlington has quite clear, quite a strong planning program, I guess you could say. Our area has a sector plan which defines kind of goals in terms of park space. Now there's obvious, where things can break down a little bit is in how things get delivered. I think in many cases here, the county has relied on developer relationships to deliver planning and planning for and implementation of the parks that are in their plans. But when you're in kind of interesting economic cycles, or the economics of the redevelopment area don't match up well, that can break down. And so you can actually miss out on opportunities if there aren't alternative strategies to deliver and implement. So I think in the context of developing a strong relationship, here at least, there needs to be a stronger kind of outline of expectations for how parks are delivered, particularly in urban environments that are redeveloping. Crystal City is a kind of a 60s, 70s era, 60s, 70s, 80s style of development where the car kind of dominated, towers in the park. So there's a lot of opportunity. There is a lot of green space here, but not particularly functional. So, again, it's a little bit about what I was saying before. Everybody's interest is to have high quality parks, but there are different positions. The county wants developers to pay for it. The developers want the county to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Being open about those expectations, and then being recognizing where implementation could break down is important, because you got to come up with solutions for them. And here, that conversation is really revolving around creative funding strategies. So I think in terms of relationship, it's really about how you get to what that interest is, and being able to work together to get there, and not just relying on business as usual, because ultimately, that communication is breaking down in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And sort of going off that, someone else asked a question about how you start conversations with private property owners to partner for open space.
To partner for use of open space?
Or to use of open space, or to acquire open space. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so at the moment, our organization hasn't been involved in acquiring open space. Again, we're somewhat constrained in terms of land ownership around here, and land is extremely valuable. Land acquisition for the county even is extremely difficult. A lot of times what they do is they use the planning structure to deliver public access easements in exchange for density bonuses. And that's what's interesting about still a lot of this open space here doesn't have public access easements, and there's a lot of reluctance a lot of times because a lot of these properties have funding associated with them from banks and loans and whatnot, and they're not willing to give up access easements outright unless there's value attached to them. So there's a lot of complex issues that are involved in open space acquisition and even easements. On the use side, part of it is really we're a private 501c6 nonprofit, so we have a board made up of stakeholders, which are typically our owners, some tenants, and then county representation. So a lot of our kind of work plan gets kind of developed over the course of a year and then approved by the board, and then we kind of use that as a roadmap through our relationships to approach to owners and stakeholders for use of their spaces. And again, because we've kind of built this track record of trust and success, we're able to kind of put forward kind of unique and creative ideas for use of private property, which sometimes it can be a real hardship on their own staffs. These property managers aren't built for placemaking programming; they're built for serving their tenants. But we have such a strong partnership with our core stakeholders that they understand what our mission is and how it supports them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great. And then I'm going to take a step back and go back to our conversation about building trust. And Bill, this question is specifically for you. Mm-hmm. Someone asked for some additional techniques and tools that you use to overcome the challenge of starting these relationships with immigrant communities.
Nice. Well, one thing I should definitely mention is that we have a really good working relationship with our Office of Immigrant Affairs. And they were my first connecting point with any community group that I worked with. And they made the connections, and they made sure that we were culturally sensitive to what we were doing at all times. And then once that happened, I did a really nice job of making connections with a community leader. That could be kind of the point person for me in that community. So whenever I had an engagement event and I needed multiple communities there, they would represent that one community instead of having a bunch of people come out. So those are probably the top two tools or techniques that I used. But like we talked about before, and I think Erin touched on a little bit, I got out as much as I could. I was at, Bhutanese naming ceremonies, and I was at Chinese festivals, and you name it, I got out there. And I think the face-to-face contact with the groups is really important. And one other thing, and it really depends on your budget and how you're situated, but our language access program in the city is really spot on. So if I do need the need for a translator at a meeting, or if I go out somewhere, it's really helpful. I think we have like 48 or 49 different languages we can translate into and have interpreters for. So those would all be things that I would say that helped overcome those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great. And so just as a reminder to all of our attendees that if you have any questions remaining, please go ahead and send them our way. But I'm going to go ahead and ask the question of to our panelists here, what would you give as advice to our park and rec professionals when it comes to forming partnerships? What are the things that you want them to take away from our discussion today? You can take a second to think about that. Some things that we talked about were, making sure that you have a compelling idea that everyone can align with when you're starting these relationships. And it's really just about starting simple, getting out there, pick up the phone and talk to people. We also talked about making sure that you're honest and you're upfront. that as you're going through this process, it's important to be transparent and open, and that it's important to take the time to really listen to the community. And then also just making sure that you're getting back to the roots and find common ground when you're facing challenges, and making sure that you are flexible throughout the process. So if you all have anything to build off of that.
I would say when developing a budget, always go back and double the amount of time you need for community outreach and engagement, because you can always use more. And whether or not you use it all for that project, you know, you could build off of it for your future projects with that particular park stakeholder groups. Like I said before, I don't think there could ever be enough time to continue to build those trusting relationships with the different stakeholder groups, you know, the different city departments, or, you know, the business owners and developers that exist in or around a park. I would also say don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board. You know, you may take 6 months and, you know, think you've really figured out the user groups and the stakeholders and what their, you know, what their needs are, and then you might have to go backwards and start all over, or, you know, rebuild trust. But again, you know, like you were saying, Jared, you know, being transparent with what your goals are from the beginning is really key, and being willing to kind of be flexible if you have that opportunity. And then the other thing is, for me personally in my organization, one of the things that we oftentimes do is we are the convener of the different groups of people. We end up being the people that bring the different entities together. So not to be afraid to do that as well, because again, you know, parks are free and open to everybody. They're for everyone, and using that as a way to draw in everybody. So for Pittsburgh in particular, the way that the city is structured is we have our Department of Public Works, we have city planning, we have our Parks and Rec department. They're all different departments. And then within the Department of Public Works, they have, you know, all their different sections of the Department of Public Works. So when we're doing a project, it's really critical for us to bring all of those people into the room, including the council people, the mayor's office, you know, the office of the budget and public safety. And we oftentimes serve as the convener. And I think that sometimes gets lost. You know, people forget to really try to bring all these different groups together to have these conversations, because it's hard. It is hard to collaborate sometimes, and it takes time. But it's really critical, I think, for the success of projects, to not be afraid to bring all those different people together, to be really strategic about the work that you're doing.
I would add in there that, at least kind of from experience, ensuring that there's a recognition of the kind of the financial side of delivering and operating and maintaining parks. Because again, here there's a lot of onus on a developer to deliver and maintain. What I think is often missing, maybe on both sides actually, is recognition of the value that park actually brings and what its economic development implications are. There's good research out there about the impact of a park space, especially in an urban community, what the impact is on property values, and how we kind of operationalize that knowledge is, I think, very important. And if both developers and park and recs and the jurisdictions can come to the table and recognize that, you know, there's opportunity on the back end of these deals to deliver, to harvest value of the park, it could really go a long way towards how we get parks delivered in the first place. You know, whether that's financing mechanisms that take advantage of future value increases. I don't think we use those enough. I know we don't use them enough here. You know, some of the local projects around here where there's open space tied to developments that just simply can't afford to incorporate an entire delivery of a park space into their pro formas. You can fund that if a jurisdiction's willing to look at future revenue sources that result from the investment that happens, not just from the park, but the park and the development itself. So I think that those are really good strategies that, at least here, seems to be missing from the table. It's too much of the old way of doing business. So being open to these new kind of strategies would be useful.
Great.
Nice. Jared, Aaron, really, really good points. And, I'll just sum it all up with things that we talked about already. The communication and the trust are key. I really think from my perspective, getting out in the communities is huge. And Aaron, you touched on that a bunch. One thing that we didn't say that I kind of value in the work that I do, and I try and live by it, is, I try and own what I do, like even when it's something that I do wrong, or if I make a mistake, like I eat it, and I let everybody know, like, listen, this one's on me, whether it's within the team or even out at an engagement event or something, and say, yeah, I messed this one up, I can't do this for you or whatever. And it just lends further into building trust and, I don't want to say, saving face, but, everyone values that when you're open and honest about making a mistake instead of trying to cover it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's important to be open, for sure. All right. So without any questions coming in, I'll go ahead and wrap this up. So thank you to our attendees and also to our panelists here for a great discussion today around partnerships. You guys will be able to find videos from the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy and NRPA's Philadelphia Innovation Lab on NRPA's 10-Minute Walk webpage at nrpa.org. Hopefully those videos will be up soon. And real quick, I'd just like to show you some things that we have coming up in the learning series. And so, there we go. Great. And so just to put these things on your radar, we have 2 opportunities to take part in the learning series. So July through September, we're going to be looking at equity in parks and recreation. And so August 3rd, we will have some videos up from your peers talking about equity and different aspects of equity. And then we are going to hold our next Q&A session on August 31st. More information to come on registration, and that will be available hopefully in the next few weeks. And of course, if you all have, if you still have some burning questions maybe that you didn't have a chance to ask today and we didn't cover it, make sure that you join the 10-Minute Walk Cities group on Parkology, where you can continue this conversation on partnerships and where we're going to start talking about equity. And so with that said, thank you again to our panelists and to our attendees for joining us today. We hope to see you again in August, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Great. Thanks, Jared.